when you're coming to know someone, let's say there's a person that kind of fascinates you, and you might watch that person for a while. Maybe you see what she wears, how she comports herself, how she relates to other people. Maybe you check with mutual friends and find out certain things about her. Maybe today, of course, you would Google her name and you could find out a lot about probably where she's from, where she's educated, where she works, etc., right? You could find out a lot simply by using your reason. Looking at things objectively and making deductions and conclusions, you could come to a good deal of knowledge about that person. Okay, but let's say you really want to get to know this person. Eventually, you have to meet her, right? Now, when you meet her, maybe when you're up close, some of what you've discovered will be verified, by your own rational analysis. But eventually, something kind of wonderful and extraordinary is going to happen. Namely, that person is going to speak. Now, when she speaks, some of what she says probably will be in line with what you already knew. It'll simply confirm what you've already understood. But, the more you get to know that person, the more that person begins to open her heart to you, the more intimately you come to know her, what's going to happen? She will reveal things about herself that you would never know in any other way. Not just where she's from and where she went to school. That's data that you can learn through a Google search. Not just anything you would pick up from watching her behave. She will disclose to you truths about herself that exist within her own interiority, in her own heart, and can only come forth through her free decision to speak. Now, at that point, and I hope you're catching that this is true of your relation to any person, right? At that point, you've got to make a decision. Decision is, well, do I believe her or not? I don't know. I can't verify these things objectively. I can't do a Google search and find out whether they're true. I have to decide, yeah, I believe this person. I have come to trust her in such a way that I now accept her speech as true. Now, I think this is a very apt and illuminating analogy for what serious Catholics, I'll speak for my tradition, mean by faith. Faith for us is that moment of trust. When I say, yes, I accept the truth of the God who speaks. And see, my point is, there's no other way, finally, to know and relate to a person other than faith. And that's true in our human relationships as well. If you were to say, in regard to another person, I will only go on what I can absolutely know through analytical reason. How much of that person will you ever know? Very little. How much of that person will you ever be able to love? Very little, see? Because you're in utter control of the process of knowing that person. In fact, you have effectively objectified the person. You've made that person an object of your investigation. How come you married that man or that woman, right? Oh, it's because I had absolutely analytical control over every... Come on. At some point, there was a mutual act of trust. Call it faith, or an exchange of hearts, right? So with God. Faith is the act of saying, Lord, I accept, I trust what you've revealed to me in your own freedom, And that's why faith is not opposed to reason, though it goes beyond it. Just as that trust in another person is not irrational, but it does go beyond reason. So in regard to God, we have finally to have faith precisely because we're dealing with the supreme person.
Welcome to the Chris Stefanik Show. I'm in Assisi. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed because St. Francis is one of my favorite saints ever, and it's overwhelming to try to honor him. He's not only one of the most amazing, world-changing saints that ever lived, he's also one of the most joyful people that ever lived. And when we look at his life, I think it uncovers secrets to joy. So let's look at his life. St. Francis was raised here in Assisi, and by the way, if you ever come here, you're going to look around and say, Well, of course, he's one of the most joyful people that ever lived. It's literal heaven in Assisi, right? But he grew up here and he was wealthy. You know, his dad was a really successful businessman, and he knew how to spend his dad's money. I think my kids might take some notes from St. Francis. He was the life of the party. He used his dad's money to throw parties, to treat his friends to drinks. He was known as the troubadour. Like everybody loved St. Francis. And he wanted to be the man. It wasn't just enough for him to be the life of the party. He wanted to be a knight in shining armor, just like a lot of young men. So he got money together, got his gear to be a knight, and went off to battle and failed and ended up a prisoner of war. And he looked at the world upside down. And he had this new perspective on everything. See, from the upside down perspective, if that were right side up, it looks like everything on earth is hanging by a thread, and it's just about to fall off and shatter in the cosmos. To sum that up with one word, it's dependence. He saw the dependence of everything on the providence of God, and he thought, whoa, I'm going to live that way. You see, so often we want to live in a way that grasps at our desire to matter, our desire for protection, for money, our desire for happiness. And we just grasp at all these things. But the radicalness of faith, and he embraced this more radically than anybody, is to say, I'm just going to see that all these desires are dependent on God filling them. And so he rejected everything in the world and thought, I'm going to live with this total constant dependence on Almighty God. And he went to this chapel, the San Damiano Chapel, and he was in front of San Damiano Cross, and he hears Jesus say the words, rebuild my church. And he took it literally. He didn't know if there was like some theological meaning to this. So he's like, okay, there's a broken church down the street, and I'm going to start there. You know, it's funny. Sometimes we think God is calling us to one direction, and we take steps in that direction. And he's actually calling us like, okay, we think it's over here. We think the story will end here. But he's just using that to get us to take the next steps that he wants us to take. But he wandered around his town, and he's gathering bricks and mortar, and he's begging, and he rebuilds this beautiful little chapel, the Porciuncula Chapel, which is still here in Assisi today. And it became his spiritual home, the home of his Franciscan community. But as he's doing this, his town starts to see him as a crazy person. I mean, dude, the life of the party from a wealthy family, going around and literally begging for bricks and mortar. And then it got even crazier in a good way. Seeing the world upside down. He took that money he used to party with, and he would sell his dad's cloth and stuff and gather more money, and he gave it to the poor. He started serving the poor with his dad's money. So his dad threw him in a jail, which honestly, I feel bad for his dad. That kind of made sense to do that. And then he went to a trial in front of bishops and a judge. And instead of saying, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up, he tore his clothes off. And here he is naked in a court, and he says, God is my father now. When we have greed, it's idolatry. Why is that? Because it is a counterfeit for and replacement of God's presence in our lives. Like when people have an inordinate love of money, they're saying money's going to provide for me. Money's going to take care of my future. Money's going to give me, quote, net worth. And God is looking down from heaven saying, yeah, I'm supposed to do those things. And Father, you provide for me. And when you live like this, when you live with your hands empty, embracing that poverty that we all have in our human condition, guess what fits in your hands? Guys, you could fit God himself, the infinite. Just like the manger, just like the creche, which Francis loved to build and preach in front of. When we embrace that kind of poverty, we can actually fit God. And here's a great paradox. You'd think that turning his back on this world, he'd be the most joyless saint. When you live like that, that's the path to the deepest joy. Why? Because when you're doing it your way and you're controlling all these things and you're holding on to them, Ecclesiastes actually talks about how it's a curse. It's a punishment from God for people who are wealthy sometimes to control and to spend their lives cursed, earning, gathering, and then controlling what they have. That's how Francis lived.
Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So one of the things that I will encounter on a regular basis is people who say, either about themselves or about someone they love, I just lost my faith. Or they'll say about, maybe one of their kids, my son or my daughter has lost their faith, or my sibling has lost their faith. I want to look at that idea, the concept of, is it possible to lose your faith? couple of things before that. One, is it possible to lose your salvation? Yes, obviously. St. Paul even talks about this when he says, for this reason, I drive my body and I train it for fear that after having preached to others, I myself might become disqualified. It's possible to lose one's salvation, to at one point say yes to God, and then at another point in one's life to say no in a definitive way to God. So that's one thing. The second thing about faith is we have to understand that faith is both a gift and a virtue. What I mean by that is no one can give themselves the gift of faith. It's always given, right? That's what a gift is. It's given. And so it's a gift given to those who believe by God himself. Now, God desires that all men come to knowledge of him and come to salvation. But it is also a virtue, which means it's something that has to be cultivated, has to be used, has to be exercised. That's one of the reasons why I say that I do not believe it's possible for anyone to lose their faith. We either choose to give it away or we choose not to use it. Now, to choose to give it away doesn't have to happen all at once. Typically, it's not one massive decision to say, no, I will not serve the Lord, I'll serve something else. Usually, though, it's when we take our heart back from the Lord and give it to something else piece by piece, because that's what having an idol is, right? It's taking a good thing and making it into an ultimate thing. Taking something that's good in this world, whether that be a relationship or a gift or a talent or a work or anything, and putting it at the center where only God should be. And again, we typically don't do that in one big move. We typically do that in very small moves. In fact, okay, so there's this thing called the sand ceremony in some weddings. No, not in Catholic weddings. It's not actually a thing that we do in Catholic weddings. But the sand ceremony is interesting. You take a glass vase or vase, and you have three different kinds of sand. There's the one color sand that represents God, right? So the couple pours that in. And then they have two different color sands for the bride and the groom. And they take turns pouring in the sand. And so in this glass vase, there's the God-colored sand, and then there's the couple's sand. It's all mixed together, and the idea behind it is, look, we are so mixed together with God as our base that it's impossible for us to be separated. Now, I get it, whatever, we don't do it as Catholics. I get the idea, but the point is actually that it can be separated. And the reality is that's how many marriages end up in shipwreck. Not because at one point they just took the glass and this vase and smashed it against the wall, but because it was like, well, I have my color sand, I'm just gonna take a little bit back. And the other person says, I'm gonna take a little bit of my colored sand back, and I'll take my color, I'll take mine back, and I'll take mine back. And little by little, with little small decision after little small decision, instead of belonging to the other, I'm now mine again. And something similar happens to us when it comes to the Lord. We can say, okay, God, I'm yours. But then what happens is little by little, something else becomes God's chief rival for my heart. Something else becomes God's chief rival for my mind. Something else becomes God's chief rival for my time. Because we're human beings. And as someone once said, the human heart is an idol-making factory. We can make idols out of almost anything. There's a guy, one of our students, great guy. His name is Kyle. And a bunch of years ago, Kyle was playing here at the University of Minnesota Duluth the year they won their first national championship in the Frozen Four, the hockey competition. And he scored the winning goal in like double overtime to close out the game. I mean, to win the whole thing. Now, I know Kyle really well at the time because he was in RCIA. He was becoming Catholic at the time. And so, that night, everyone's going crazy all over the city of Duluth. Like, we finally won this national championship. And so the next day I called up Kyle. I'm like, dude, congratulations on the winning goal. I mean, that's what you dream about your whole life. His response showed whether God had a chief rival in his life or not. His response was, yeah, it was really cool, a whole team effort, when in this moment, I invite all of us to say, okay, God given you, if you're watching this, God is calling you to faith. If he hasn't already given it to you, he's calling you to receive it. If you're watching this, I'm telling you that. If you're watching this, God is calling you to faith. He's giving you the gift of faith. Our decision is to use that, to walk in it. What do I mean? Lean into this relationship with God in Jesus Christ. If you identify any rival that God has in your heart, say, okay, I'll do whatever I can to eliminate that rival or to augment that rival so the rival no longer has God's position. If I find myself not using it, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to begin by praying. I'm going to live as if I am someone who has faith. I'm going to walk as someone who has faith. I'm going to talk as someone who has faith. I'm going to be someone who has faith.